From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The 32nd APEC Economic Leaders Meeting is taking place in the Republic of Korea from October the 31st to November the 1st. At the invitation of Korean President Lee Jae-myung, Chinese President Xi Jinping is attending the meeting and paying a state visit to the Republic of Korea. On October the 30th in the coastal city of Busan, President Xi Jinping met with U.S. President Donald Trump. The meeting came on the heels of China-U.S. economic and trade talks in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where the two sides reached substantive outcomes, including the cancellation of fentanyl tariffs, the suspension of reciprocal tariffs and export controls, as well as agreements to deepen cooperation on trade, technology, and public health. Could this signal a new phase of mutual confidence between Beijing and Washington, and a more hopeful horizon for the global economy? As the world navigates ongoing economic challenges and shifting trade dynamics, how can Asia-Pacific economies join hands to foster growth, deepen cooperation, and seize opportunities for the region and beyond? To help us unpack all these indications of this important meeting, we're joined in Brisbane, Australia by Warwick Powell, adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology in New York. We have Anthony Chen, former chief economist at JP Morgan Chase. And here in the Beijing studio, we have Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business Economics, as well as Zhang Gong, professor of economics at the University of International Business and Economics. So Professor Liu, let me go to you first. We've seen this as a pattern where the Chinese side has been consistent, has been a steady hand in dealing with Washington. And let's say sometimes radical policies coming out of Washington, charting a new course this time around in the summit between President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping, where they talk about, meeting each other, having a forward-looking relationship, a cooperative, strategic, long-term, positive relationship. China and the United States should be partners and friends. That's according to President Xi. How significant do you think this moment will be, not only symbolically, but also in shaping a steadier tone for global markets and renewed confidence in Asia-Pacific cooperation?
I think this moment is both symbolic and also substantive because when I say it's symbolic, because there are still many hanging issues that need to be tackled with in terms of structural issues, in terms of basic sectorial issues that are still, having some the spats where we can go that needs further negotiation and also self-reflection. And it's substantive because, after the last 4 rounds of negotiation, finally with the summit, both sides at least created a very, friendly atmosphere and set up the tone to deal with the dust that is really generated by the U.S. side. And as you say, that China has been very coherent and very consistent in its foreign policy that we continue to open our door on a high level, and we will not be bullied, we will not be threatened, and there is no chance for China to capitulate, as some other countries have done, which gave pretty much the self-entertainment for Donald Trump. And now, we are also very open to work with the United States because we believe that there are every reason that we need to work together, given our interdependence, given the global responsibility that both of the largest economies are really paying attention to. And without such a sort of collaboration, many of the world issues like pandemic issues, public health, and climate change, and even military issues cannot really be resolved. So therefore, I think both sides come up to reality and see that the benefit far prevails over the frictions that might really be able to arrive by the level of collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, China hasn't capitulated. China never does. If you think about this at least 200-year interaction with the United States and the West. Professor Wang Guan, what do you think? What messages did you pick up from the summit between President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping?
Well, I guess I will first mention something that President Trump mentioned. After the summit, he said that this is a G2 meeting. I think that the phrase he invoked is of significance and importance. I think it's the two most important countries, the most important bilateral relations between the two countries. If you look back at a series of policies coming from Washington, as President Trump started his trade war, not just against China, but the entire world, at every step of the way, China responded and essentially retaliated as well. I can't think of another country that President Trump's tariffs have hit so far responding in the same manner. And at the end of the day, the two sides come to an agreement. Both sides make some compromises, and I think this shows that China is indeed negotiating from a position of strength. And this is something that President Trump understands. He opened his statement by saying President Xi is a great leader from a great country. So I think it's a natural outcome that would be expected between the two powers. And I also want to mention another thing that President Trump mentioned after the summit. He said that he is going to visit China in April next year, and return by another visit by President Xi to, looks like it's going to be Mar-a-Lago in Florida. So I think at least from the time from now to these visits happening, there should be more of a stable period of time between the two countries, economically as well as politically.
Okay, let me turn to Anthony Chang. I mean, it seems to many strategists that Washington had a turn of attitudes, have a strategy towards China around 2017 and 2016, where the strategists along the Beltway had a rethink about what kind of country, what kind of partner China should be, turning from this a robust engagement to a all-out containment strategy that has been unfolding since Trump 1.0. How do you see the significance of this Trump-Xi summit in Republic of Korea in shaping China-U.S. relations in the foreseeable future?
Well, I think that what it does is to foster a greater sense of cooperation between the countries. Maybe to quote President Trump, when asked about how the meeting went, he said on a scale of 1 to 10, he gives it a 12. That seems to be a bit of an exaggeration on my part, but it's encouraging that that was the perception that he had coming out of this meeting. To me, the meeting basically eliminated the threat of a cessation of trade between both countries. When we're talking about potential tariffs of 100%, or even some numbers that were as high as 155%, it basically says you just eliminate trade between both countries. That would have just completely fractured global supply chains. That would have caused havoc in the global economy, and certainly it would have caused major problems for both the United States and the Chinese economies. So I think it was the realization of the potential threats that were inherent by not proceeding with greater cooperation that prompted both leaders to basically lower those tensions a little bit. Now, I don't want to give the impression that this is a big deal, because I think what it really is like a strategic détente meeting. And so here I'm echoing the words of Professor Gong, that it's encouraging, but it doesn't really mean that we are completely done with agreements with China. This is a step in the right direction, but it's not the final agreement that we would all love to see.
Warwick in Australia, Anthony said that this is a strategic détente. We've had détentes in the past, in the 70s and 80s and kind of in the 90s. And how long do you think this round of strategic détente, if it should be one, can last?
Well, the agreement so far specifies 12 months for quite a number of the provisions. So I guess when 12 months comes up and it begins to mature, there will be some further thought as to whether or not it's extended. But I think one of the reasons why it's likely to extend into the future is that it's an agreement based on a recognition of some very foundational aspects of reality. It's a progressive, quiet unraveling of the centerpiece of Trump economics. Let's not forget that tariffs is the centerpiece of this administration's game plan to rejuvenate America, both domestically in economic terms and also to use tariffs as a foreign policy instrument around the world. And on all of these fronts, we now have a situation where tariffs as the centerpiece is slowly being pushed to one side, and the levels that exist at the moment are meaningless insofar as all of those core objectives are concerned. It is a quiet packing up of Trump economics, which is actually going to be in the interest of Americans, because it will hopefully reopen up pathways for the constructive engagement of the United States in the global economy rather than the United States continuing to play a destructive and spoiling force.
Well, Professor Liu, we've heard from the Chinese president, President Xi, compared China-U.S. relations using another metaphor, saying that this is a giant vessel that must stay on the course despite challenges. How does this metaphor of putting China-U.S. relations as a giant vessel navigating, oceans, deep, unforeseen oceans, how does this metaphor capture the reality of the two great powers? Learning to coexist, and what are the risks if that steady course is lost?
Well, they are the two great superpowers, not only in economic terms, but by many other dimensions. And if they are there to revel the kitchen, and then the whole table will be spoiled for the whole world. So therefore, it is the level of leadership and responsibility for these two countries to take care, of course, their own constituencies home, but in the meanwhile, they need really to take into consideration of the global growth and recovery, and also many global issues will have to be tackled with in consultation and collaboration. There can be differences, but the differences must be manageable in that we are able to deliver a responsible outcome. And now, when we talk about challenges, these countries have entirely different type of political regime, but it doesn't mean that we cannot really talk, we cannot collaborate. And over the last almost half a century, during the Chinese open door process, we see that the trade, investment, and many other corporations have really accelerated. But now, when Donald Trump has been serving twice in the office, there has been some turning points, and hopefully, these big ships, and also with these captains, they can exercise their vision and turn into more of the realistic deliverables through action, and so that all stakeholders can feel that they will be able to predict the environment that both of the leaders can really create for them to make their own rational decisions. So this is really a very much of a critical moment, and the world are really watching. And so hopefully this time Donald Trump will not really go back on his words.
Yeah, because we've seen the United States ragging on its promises, walking back from its promises multiple times in 2017 and 16 and in Washington when there were senior trade talks. Now, Professor Wang Guan, let me ask you about this. Following the economic talks in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, both sides agreed to cancel and suspend key tariffs on fentanyls, and also, according to Donald Trump and his social media tweets, soybeans. Now the United States can reportedly sell soybeans to China, so that Brazil, for example, is no longer the only country that can sell all those soybeans to China. Export control eases, expanding cooperation in agriculture. Do these concrete steps signal that the two sides are moving from managing crisis to creating shared opportunities?
Well, I think these steps represent the compromises on both parts. Certainly, negotiations is all about making compromises. Both sides make some concessions, and you give something, the other side also gives something. So I think the way to judge these things is to look at the situation before Washington started its policies against China. I think from that perspective, essentially, China is able to roll back these protectionist measures, especially coming from the Commerce Department. The docking fees are now going out. The export controls to some extent are going out. So I think from that perspective, China does indeed claim that it walks away with some winning clauses here. But nevertheless, I think this is only for a year. It's going to be extended. Another thing I'm a little bit disappointed, to be honest with you, is that I thought the entire fentanyl-related tariffs would be gone. Because there are some reports prior to this event that mentions that these tariffs would be gone, but President Trump only took off half of that, 10%. And I would expect that the expectation would be maybe after a year, he should be able to take off the other 10%, because after all, China has done a great deal of things for addressing the fentanyl issue, based on my understanding and my knowledge. And in my view, it should have taken off a long time ago. But nevertheless, 10% does help. If you think about the total value of Chinese exports to the United States, it's a little bit short of $400 billion, I believe. So 10% tariffs off, that means it's a $40 billion value proposition here. Still a lot of money, though. It puts Chinese exports very much back into the competitive landscape. Can still compete with products coming from, say, Vietnam or from Thailand and Malaysia. It's still quite competitive. It helps a lot, and I hope that after a year, these tariffs will be further reduced.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some tough negotiations involved. Anthony, now this combination of trade breakthroughs of sorts and leader-level diplomacy has sent strong signals to global markets. Do you see this as the beginning of a more predictable and cooperative China-U.S. economic relationship? And what ripple effects could it have for Asia-Pacific and beyond?
Well, I think for Asia Pacific countries, what it does is that the stabilization of these global supply chains and the greater resilience of these supply chains really allows many of these APEC countries to be able to work more closely together. And I know that that's been a very important goal of China. And that gives me great comfort, because to the extent that greater cooperation between the APEC countries takes place, you're going to see greater supply chain resilience. And certainly it puts these countries in a much better and stronger position to deal with the rest of the world. And essentially it takes off on an important point that was made by Dr. Powell, that it will tell the United States that there is a new reality, that somehow it's not just the United States dealing with the global South or these APEC countries. It's a global situation. And I think that that is a step in the right direction. And it really also tells me that now these two countries, namely China and the United States, see that there is more benefit to be achieved by cooperation than by these intense trade tensions and crises that they've been managing, certainly over the last couple of weeks. That is not productive. This is much more productive step. But again, it's a preliminary step, but it gives an opportunity for APEC countries to strengthen the bond and the trading relationships that they have, because as we all know, there's been even some minor tensions between APEC countries. I think that this will encourage them to move forward.
Now, I want to ask Warwick about this question, because he kind of have an outsider point of view. although he lived in China long enough to know what's going on in China as well. Warwick, so Australia, the United States, and China have this very interesting triangular relationship. Australia has been the staunchest ally of the United States, fighting virtually every single war with the United States since the World War II. But whereas China and Australia have been very good and robust trading allies, if you think about iron ore, minerals, China has been Australia's #1 trading partner for years on end. So how do you look at this détente, this strategic détente, this meeting between President Xi and President Trump? How long do you think this goodwill, this détente can really last?
Well, I'm assuming that the Australians would be relieved that some tension has been removed out of the system. Being caught in the middle is an uncomfortable position, particularly when you are a relatively small country with dependencies in both directions. I often describe Australia's relationship with China and the United States as walking with one foot on either side of a barbed wire fence, where you're always worried that you're going to slip. So I think Australia will be relieved for the time being. Let's not forget also, in terms of Australia's trading relationships and its attitudes to trade, that it's a country that is long been a supporter of open multilateral trade across the globe. And in fact, Australia's own response to the tariffs imposed by the United States administration was actually not to reciprocate, because Australia wasn't going to be in a position, firstly, to stand toe-to-toe, but also because Australia knew that if it tried to do that, it would just increase the costs on Australian consumers. More recently, Australia, China, and the other members of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership also executed some agreements, or arrived at a consensus to progress and expand RCEP as well for the region. So this is the region's largest free trade agreement, and so I think that Australia will be looking forward to some normality and some stability, and perhaps also take advantage of this moment of calm to perhaps seek to quietly advocate in Washington that this really should be the path of the future.
I mean, thanks so much for really informing us on these Australian perspectives. We learned a lot. Now, Professor Liu Baocheng, China's vision, economic resilience, was articulated by President Xi, where he described China's economy as a vast ocean, big, resilient, and promising. How do China's economic fundamentals and its upcoming 15th five-year plan, if voted into constitution and law in the March meetings, reinforce the message that China remains a driver of global confidence and growth?
Well, in Donald Trump's perspective, that as long as you are buying something, you are doing somebody a favor. We can do a lot more favor to the United States by further opening the Chinese market with more of the rising middle class and with stronger purchase power. And second, China has pledged to the world we are going to implement high-level or institutional opening so that more of the foreign companies, particularly that from the United States, they can really get parked in China. And the fact that China is now hosting more than 1 million foreign companies over the last more than 40 years shows the fact that we continue to turn out to be the most attractive destination for global investments. And then China is also there to strengthen its industrial might by beefing up its the manufacturing capability, and this is something that can be highly complementary with the United States. So Donald Trump's way of bringing all the U.S. manufacturer back to the United States is totally unrealistic. So I think by synergizing with each other along the entire supply chain, both sides can benefit a great deal. And of course, China is also open for more of people-to-people exchange. And so the Chinese culture, Chinese education, and also the Chinese landscape continue to be attractive to tourists from all over the world, inclusive of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, China made it clear that we want to be inclusive of the United States, even the Belt and Road Initiative. But I think some senior State Department officials called the Italian foreign minister, called out the German chancellor, asking them not to go in for the Belt and Road Initiative many years ago. That is really unfortunate. Now, Professor Guan, President Xi stressed that economic and trade relations should serve as an anchor of China-U.S. relations, not a stumbling block. I think it means what he says. How can both sides build on this meeting to institutionalize communication, diplomatic engagement, and reduce frictions and make cooperation the default mode going forward?
Well, I think the theory of the anchor theory, the economic and trade relationship be serving as an anchor for the bilateral relationship, was very popular quite a few years ago. I think since the first Trump administration, Washington, a lot of politicians in Washington, also think tank analysts, been taking this position that decoupling is possible between China and the United States. America doesn't want China, doesn't want this economic and trade relationship. So this anchor theory sort of abandoned unilaterally by Washington. And in return, it's quite interesting to see that China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs hasn't been really talking about the anchor theory for quite some time. But now President Xi today mentioned this again. And I think it's of huge significance that President Xi is again talking about this. I think the past few years of experience has shown that decoupling, severing ties between China and the United States around the economic dimensions is totally unrealistic. The trade is declining for the last few months. Nevertheless, the two economies are still very much complementary towards each other, still very interdependent on each other. So I think President Xi mentioned this again to show that at the end of the day, we still have to talk, we still have to maintain this economic relationship. And indeed, the trade and economic relationship serves a anchoring function for the bilateral relationship. So I think this is a very significant event that shouldn't be overlooked. I think again, we have different political systems, we have different ideologies, but still this anchoring thing based on commerce and economic relationship still very much serve the interests of both countries and contribute immensely to the bilateral relationships.
Great insights. Now, Anthony, markets often respond not just to policy, but to tone and predictability. Now, with both leaders sending positive messages and concrete actions following, how might this new atmosphere of cooperation influence global investment confidence and capital flows, in your opinion?
I think over the near term, it certainly will encourage capital flows. The Shanghai market just hit a new high, so the financial markets are pretty excited. You see the equity markets in the United States hitting all-time highs. So the messages leading up to this agreement were all very positive and likely to continue. But one thing that wasn't mentioned at all today was that the reason why we got, I think, a strong positive result from this meeting is because China came in to this meeting with very strong economic fundamentals. You saw the real GDP growth coming in at 4.8%. You see the United States under a lot of pressure from its farmers to negotiate, for the United States to negotiate some sort of a purchase of the soybeans because the grain elevators were so full. So again, this created an atmosphere for a positive outcome. And the financial markets are certainly going to reflect that and continue to reflect that in the investment flows. And perhaps it'll lead to an opening of investment opportunities for both countries.
Great insights, Anthony. That's all the time we have, unfortunately. Thank you, gentlemen, for your perspectives on this very important summit. And thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. Thank you for watching CGTN. Bye and take care.